Don't knock the intercom. They never answer, but the bell rang anyway. In a house too clean to remember laughter, something stirred. At the top of Sao Paulo's Hardines district, the Valente mansion shimmered like a glass cage. Marble too white, windows sealed too tight, silence so polished it throbbed. Inside, Bruno Valente, a billionaire who scheduled feelings the same way he scheduled board meetings, lived by structure. Pills at 7, therapy at 8. Precision, order, control, his gods. Down the corridor came the sophomore wheels. His 9-year-old twins, Mateo and Diego, rolled side by side in their chrome chairs, small kings of a kingdom too quiet. They rarely spoke, not because they couldn't, but because no one really listened anymore. Love here had become efficient, sterile, and safe, but hardly alive. That afternoon, candidate number 18 arrived from the bus stop, clutching a battered folder like it carried her last good breath. She did not glance at the chandeliers or the artwork lining the walls. She looked straight at the boys. Before Bruno could list his endless rules, she knelt on the marble floor, meeting their eyes. "Hi, champions," she said, her voice warm as a kitchen on a rainy day. "Tell me your names." The air changed shape. Mateo blinked. Diego turned shyly. Two trembling voices still found courage. "I'm Mateo," whispered one. "He's Diego," said the other. 3 names spoken softly cracked the mansion's stillness wide open, proof that sometimes presence is medicine. Bruno froze, his well-practiced control faltering. Protocols didn't teach you how to look a child in the eye. And in that fragile hello, the Valente mansion learned a dangerous truth. Order can keep you from breaking and also keep you from living. The next morning, the mansion woke to something unfamiliar. When Amara Baptiste unlocked the terrace doors, sunlight spilled in like an uninvited guest, dragging in the city's pulse. Footsteps, horns, a street vendor's laughter far below. Dust danced in the light, and for the first time in years, the silence trembled. At breakfast, Bruno recited rules like scripture. Therapy times, hygiene codes, meal plans. His voice sounded like an instruction manual, not a man. Amara nodded politely, writing nothing down. When he left, the front door's echoes sounded softer than usual, almost relieved. She looked around. Marble floors too shiny, toys untouched, air that smelled of disinfectant instead of life. Too clean, she thought. Too lonely to be alive. In the living room, Mateo and Diego sat before the TV, hands folded, faces still. Amara turned it off. The silence startled them. Then she smiled and sat on the floor beside them. "What do you like to do?" she asked. Mateo shrugged. "We just watch cartoons." "And if you could do anything?" Diego hesitated. "I used to draw." "Used to? Why'd you stop?" He looked down. Nobody cared. Amara's smile deepened, quiet, knowing. "Then I care. Let's fix that." Within an hour, the mansion was unrecognizable. Grocery paper covered the walls. Old paint-filled jars. 2 small hands gripped trembling brushes. The first color stroke was hesitant. The next came laughing. Soon the walls bloomed with lines that had purple wings, stars with crooked smiles, and laughter that echoed against the marble. When Bruno came home early, he froze in the doorway. Torn paper, blue streaks on white walls. Chaos, laughter. "Father, look!" Mateo shouted, pointing to their masterpiece. Bruno's throat tightened. It was disorder, and it was beautiful. For the first time in years, he didn't ask for silence. He just stood still and let color and laughter fill the hollow parts of him. By the 3rd week, the Valente house no longer sounded like a hospital. It breathed. You could hear it. In Mateo's laughter bouncing off the walls, in Diego's shy humming, in Amara's soft steps as she danced through her chores. The air smelled of coffee instead of antiseptic, of toasted bread instead of cold marble. Every morning began with music low, curtains open, and sunlight catching the chrome of the boys' wheelchairs like small miracles. Amara turned therapy sessions into treasure hunts. Clues hidden around the house, each stretch or exercise unlocking the next. A chocolate here, a toy car there, or a tiny note that read, "You did it." Mateo laughed at every clue. Diego pretended to roll his eyes, but saved each note in his pocket. One afternoon, Amara returned from the market with a dusty telescope, scratched but sturdy. "It's a little broken," she said, "but it still knows how to find stars." "We don't know how to use it," Diego muttered. "Then we'll learn. The sky belongs to everyone." That night, they rolled into the garden. The city's glow faded behind them as clouds parted, revealing Saturn's pale ring. "I see it," Diego gasped. Mateo leaned close. "It's real." From a kitchen window, Bruno watched silently. A woman, two boys, one telescope, and something in him cracked. On the counter beside him lay Amara's small notebook, forgotten. Inside, grocery lists, reminders, and one note, "Smile when they look at you." He closed it quickly, throat burning. Those weren't a worker's notes. They were vows. The next evenings, Bruno found himself coming home early, just to stand quietly in the hallway and listen. To Amara's laugh, his son's joy, and the strange, human rhythm of a home rediscovering its heartbeat. And as he watched, he began to understand. Healing never arrives in order. It arrives in color, in noise, in the courage of someone who dares to love what's broken. By early autumn, something soft had begun to bloom, unspoken but alive. Bruno lingered longer by the kitchen door, just to hear Amara hum while cooking. Her laughter calmed the boys faster than any medicine. The air had rhythm again, delicate, dangerous. One midnight, he came downstairs and found her folding laundry under the soft glow of a lamp. "I thought you'd gone to bed," he said. "Almost." She smiled, not looking up. "Do you ever stop working?" "Do you?" she teased. The clock ticked between them. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, just company." It wasn't romance. Not yet. Just two people breathing the same ache. Hers shaped by loss, his by guilt. After a long pause, Bruno whispered, "I wasted so much time being afraid to look at them. My sons." Amara placed the last folded shirt aside. "You were protecting yourself." "I did that too. But you can't heal what you won't touch." He met her eyes and didn't look away. Something shifted, small, irreversible. The next day, the house felt lighter, though no one said why. At dinner, Mateo asked, "Dad, do you like Amara?" Bruno nearly choked. Amara froze. "Of course I do," Bruno managed. Like her." Diego grinned. "Because we do." Bruno said nothing. Neither did Amara. But silence doesn't always mean denial. That night, she sat in her small room, folding her old towel, the one she carried for luck. A tiny red stain clung to one corner. It wasn't dirt. It was life. She smiled faintly, unaware that love, quiet and unguarded, was about to be tested by a world still blind to hearts like hers. The following Saturday arrived gray and heavy. The mansion's gate opened, and the echo of heels cut through the morning calm. Evelyn Dwart, Bruno's late wife's mother, entered, perfume sharp, chin high, judgment first. "Who is this woman?" she demanded, seeing Amara at the foot of the stairs. "She takes care of the house and the boys," Bruno said evenly. "The cleaning woman," Evelyn repeated flatly. Amara didn't lower her eyes. Behind her, Mateo and Diego peeked from the hallway, breath tight. Evelyn's gaze swept over painted walls, paper drawings, flowers in a cup, and the telescope by the window. Something flickered, confusion, maybe envy, but she only said, "I'll speak to you privately, Bruno." That word, privately, landed like a verdict. The restaurant slowly emptied as the golden afternoon light faded into soft shades of amber and blue. Waiters cleared the last few plates, the clinking of cutlery replaced by the gentle hum of city traffic beyond the glass walls. Emily stood quietly near the counter, still in her uniform, holding the now empty tray against her chest. Her heart raced with disbelief at what had just happened. She had simply followed her instinct, spoken a few words of kindness, and somehow it had changed everything. Charles Donovan remained seated at the table long after Mr. Takahiro had left. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms and business empires now sat in silence, humbled and strangely peaceful. He turned the events over in his mind, the sound of Emily's calm, fluent Japanese replaying like music, For the first time in years, someone had reminded him what business was truly about: connection, trust, and humanity. When Emily finally approached to collect the last of the dishes, Charles rose from his seat. "Miss," he began, his voice quieter than before, "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just save a deal, you saved me from forgetting what really matters." Emily flushed slightly, unsure what to say. "I only did what anyone would have done," she replied softly. Charles smiled faintly. "No," he said, "most people wouldn't have." That night, as the restaurant lights dimmed and the world outside glittered beneath the city skyline, Charles waited by the entrance. The rain had started again, a gentle drizzle that reflected the streetlights like falling stars. When Emily stepped out, her old coat pulled tightly around her, he approached her with an envelope. "I wanted to offer you something," he said, handing it to her. His tone carried none of the arrogance or authority that had once defined him. It was warm, almost fatherly. Emily hesitated before taking it. Inside was a check, the number so large it made her breath catch. But what touched her most wasn't the money. It was the note that accompanied it. In simple handwriting, it read, "For the bridge you built when I had none." Emily looked up, her eyes glistening. "Sir, I can't take this," she said gently, pushing it back into his hands. Charles frowned slightly. "It's the least I can do." "You already gave me what I needed," she replied, her voice trembling but firm. "Belief. That's worth more than any check." Charles stood there for a moment, silent and humbled. In that instant, he saw in her something he hadn't seen in anyone for a long time: integrity untouched by money. As she walked away into the misty evening, her figure fading into the glow of passing cars, Charles made a quiet decision that would soon change her life forever. The next morning, while the city awakened to another bustling weekday, Emily was back at work, preparing breakfast tables. The memory of the previous day felt surreal, like a dream she couldn't quite believe had been real. But before her shift could begin, the restaurant manager approached her with a puzzled look. "Emily," he said, "there's someone here to see you." When she turned, her breath caught. Standing at the entrance was Charles Donovan, dressed impeccably in a gray suit, his usual air of confidence softened by something new: respect. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said kindly. Emily quickly shook her head. "No, sir, not at all. How can I help you?" He smiled. "Actually, I was hoping I could help you." He explained that after their encounter, he'd spoken to his company's international division. He wanted to offer her a position, not as a translator, but as a member of his international relations team. "You have what most people can't buy," he told her: empathy, grace under pressure, and the courage to speak when it matters most. Emily was speechless. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Charles said simply. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in a long while, her father's words came back to her. Understanding someone's language isn't about words, it's about respect. Within months, Emily's life transformed in ways she had never imagined. She moved out of the tiny apartment she shared with 2 roommates and rented a small studio near Central Park. Her days were now filled with meetings, travel, and moments of wonder she once thought were out of reach. At Donovan Global, she became known for her calm demeanor and ability to turn tense negotiations into genuine partnerships. While others chased numbers, she built trust. Her presence often reminded Charles of that morning in the restaurant, the day a trembling waitress had taught him what true leadership looked like. Soon, Emily helped launch cultural exchange programs between Donovan Global and companies across Asia. The initiative wasn't just about business. It was about creating understanding between people. She even helped connect small startups in Tokyo and New York, fostering opportunities for young entrepreneurs who, like her, only needed someone to believe in them. Her story spread quietly at first, a waitress who turned a billionaire's panic into purpose. Journalists began to take notice, writing headlines like, "The waitress who spoke up and saved a fortune." But for Emily, fame was never the goal. Every success, every handshake, every smile reminded her of her father's teachings, and of that moment when courage whispered louder than fear. One evening, nearly a year later, Charles invited Emily to a private company dinner. As they sat overlooking the same skyline where their paths had crossed, he raised a toast to the girl who reminded me that the greatest deals are made not with money, but with heart. The room filled with applause. Emily blushed, lowering her gaze, but when she looked up, she caught sight of Charles smiling, proud, not as a boss, but as someone who had been forever changed by her kindness. After the dinner, he handed her a small box. Inside was her father's exact model of Japanese-English dictionary, restored and bound in leather. "I thought you might like this," he said softly. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "How did you—" "I had someone find a copy," Charles replied. "I remembered what you said about your father. He taught you something worth more than anything I've ever built." She hugged the dictionary to her chest, whispering, "Thank you for believing in me." Years passed. Emily's influence continued to grow. She became a voice for ethical business and cross-cultural communication, often invited to speak at international forums. Yet, despite her achievements, she never forgot where it all began, the small act of courage in a five-star restaurant when she decided to speak. Mr. Takahiro, too, never forgot that day. When a journalist once asked him why he chose to trust Donovan Global, he simply smiled and said, "Because one waitress showed me the soul of their business." And somewhere in his office in Tokyo, framed on his desk, was a photo of that meeting. Charles, Emily, and himself laughing over coffee. Sometimes destiny doesn't shout. It whispers in the quiet courage of a young woman who chooses to act when no one else will. Emily's story became a reminder that kindness, empathy, and understanding can bridge worlds that power and money never could. And as the years went on, Charles often told new employees the same thing. You can build towers that touch the sky, but without kindness, they'll always stand empty. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness and courage still matter in a world obsessed with success and wealth, please share, and subscribe to Forever Tales. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage, a word spoken, a hand extended, a heart opened, can change not just one life, but many. And who knows, the next story might be yours.